Okay, so the organizers give me the easy task, come up with a solution for nuclear weapons. So those who are sleeping have been woken up by Putin. I have always been told that nuclear-armed states like Russia, one of the three founders of the NPT, are responsible nuclear weapon states. That nuclear weapons exist only for defensive reasons. That they are political, not for being used. That these weapons yield deterrence, stability, security, and peace. Here, we see a huge nuclear weapon state attacking a smaller neighboring non-nuclear weapon state behind a wall of 6,000 nuclear weapons. Very cowardly. And explicitly threatening to use nuclear weapons. More than once. I call this instability instead of stability. Insecurity instead of security. And war instead of peace. 500,000 soldiers have been killed or wounded. Just the opposite of what the proponents of nuclear weapons, including most experts in the nuclear weapon states, always claim. Interestingly, most advocates of nuclear weapons do not see it this way. They are reinforced in what they see right now, that nuclear deterrence works. I'm not going into this ideological debate, but notice, if critics of nuclear weapons cannot win the debate by referring to this war and the war inducing an extremely dangerous role of nuclear weapons, in this war, this is going to become a very, very difficult issue to resolve. And my message is not going to end nicely, just a warning. I think Patricia, Alexander, Beatrice, Wilfred informed us already. The situation is far from rosy. Nuclear arms control is in shatters. In my view, it started already going downhill since 1995, and I've been warning for this in my first book in 1998. In 2026, in all likelihood, the last bilateral arms control treaty, New START, will be gone. From then onwards, we call it Old START. And over time, the ABM treaty, CFE, INF, Open Skies, GCPOA have been thrown into the dustbin. New START will, in all likelihood, follow. And for the first time since the beginning of the 70s, there won't be any bilateral arms control, nuclear arms control treaty left. What about nuclear disarmament? Just look to the numbers, to the facts. For the first time since the 1980s, the overall number of nuclear weapons is not decreasing anymore, but going up since last year. Completely against Article 6 of the NPT, that at least wanted to stop the nuclear arms race. And let's look to non-proliferation. Despite what some experts claim, just look to the facts. After the entry into force of the NPT, the 6 existing nuclear armed states were joined by another 3. That means plus 50%. Good? Question mark? I don't think so. Iran's breakout time today is 0 days. 0. It's just up to Ayatollah Khamenei to decide to go nuclear. And if he does, we end up for the first time with a double-digit number of nuclear weapon states. 10. And it won't be long before Saudi Arabia and other Middle Eastern states may follow. Think about Turkey, maybe Egypt. And last but not least, new technology, the topic of the conference today, like cyber, AI, hypersonics, autonomous weapon systems, will further degrade strategic stability amongst the nuclear powers. The risk of attacks on command and control system increases, which will push the nuclear armed states to keep their nuclear weapons on high alert, which is dangerous. In addition, there's the possibility that the oceans become transparent, thanks to big data and AI. And that the most reliable delivery vehicle for a secure second strike, submarines, falls by the wayside, which may further increase instability. So the picture, ladies and gentlemen, looks very dark. Have a look to the doomsday clock. Yeah? It should never closer to midnight than nowadays. The only light in the dark is the TPNW. which is, and it is sometimes not well understood, revolutionary. For the first time, nuclear weapons have been declared illegal, including their possession, their use, and threat of use, but the deterrence doctrines. Illegal. That, of course, only applies to those states that adhere to the treaty. But the norm is strengthened for everyone. Also new is that for the first time, the Global South and other middle powers like Austria are at the steering wheel. It's not by chance. It reflects the changing balance of power in the world. Now comes the bad news. While the TPNW was maybe in the first place supposed to be a signal to the nuclear weapon states and their allies, a signal to take Article 6 of the NPT serious, the nuclear weapon states reacted very defensively, dismissively, with the United States, the UK, and France saying that they will never sign the treaty, never. And other nuclear weapon states attacking the TPNW, saying that the treaty comes too soon. Hello, the NPT dates from 1970. We are now 2023. If you ask me, the non-nuclear weapon states have had enough patience. No? What about the future? What about the so-called solution? Now, the international community basically has two options for heuristic purposes. Either muddling through, business as usual. That means try saving as much from the existing arms control and non-proliferation regime as possible, but in all likelihood, losing even more and seeing more states going nuclear and maybe ending up in more wars in which nuclear weapons are threatened to be used, and in the worst case, being used. Under this first scenario, the most one could aim for are risk reduction measures. The CTBT, fissile material cutoff, although even the latter two will be very unlikely to resurrect, and hope for a better geopolitical environment in 50 years' time, and then start doing the classic arms control again. That's, of course, the most likely scenario, but carrying enormous risks. Much better would be a bigger change, a 180-degree turn, or for those who don't like revolutions, a 150 or 120-degree turn in the direction of nuclear elimination, in the direction of fundamentally delegitimizing nuclear weapons. That is visible in the force structure, declaratory, and operational policy of the nuclear armed states. This reform has to come from inside the nuclear armed states, but the outside world can help and should help pushing the nuclear armed states. Otherwise, it probably won't work. And here we could distinguish the non-allied and allied non-nuclear weapon states. First of all non-allied non-nuclear weapon states that have negotiated the TPNW, more than 120, should adhere to the treaty as soon as possible. We are far from there. 93 states have signed. I've updated this morning, and 69 of them are state-bound. So we are not there yet. Once that is done, the focus will move to the allied non-nuclear weapon states, countries like Belgium, Germany. The allied non-nuclear weapon states have to change their mind and start getting rid of their dependence on the nuclear armed states in the form of END, extended nuclear deterrence, including nuclear sharing. Nuclear sharing, which is, of course, more and more criticized in the framework of the NPT, by the way. Nowadays, the allies, and basically the NATO member states, the Asian allies of the United States and Belarus, are the biggest supporters of the nuclear armed states. They help hide the nuclear armed state from criticism from the rest of the world. The Global South and the NGOs. Most experts believe that it's the other way around, that the nuclear weapon states help hide the allies. No, the allies help hide the nuclear armed states. The best example is Japan. Japan that was able to convince the Obama administration in 2016 not to switch to a no first use policy or a sole purpose policy. Now, I understand that the geopolitical situation of some of those allies is not ideal. But, and this is fundamental, nuclear weapons are not going to help them, these allies. Kissinger, Patrick Morgan, and many others already during the Cold War told the Europeans that extended nuclear deterrence is not credible. Yeah? And it has not become more credible thereafter. For those who prefer empirics instead of theory, in this war, President Biden implicitly has already made clear that if Ukraine, a de facto NATO member state, is attacked with Russian tactical nuclear weapons, then the United States is not going to respond with nuclear weapons. Not with strategic nuclear weapons, not with tactical nuclear weapons. And that reasoning probably also applies to an attack against a de jure NATO member state. You know why? Because it's too dangerous. It may end up in a global nuclear war. So the United States will probably respond with conventional weapons, and therefore basically threaten with conventional weapons, which is much more credible, because they can be used, conventional weapons. A democratically elected president, and it has been said yesterday as well, like in the United States, is not going to use nuclear weapons in support of allies thousands of kilometers away, because it's not in the interest of the United States. The US is geostrategically located very safe. Fish, Canadians, Mexicans. They are not going to risk a massive strategic nuclear weapons attack to help Lithuania, which is very wise to do, because if the United States uses nuclear weapons, Lithuania, a small country, won't exist anymore. In short, END, extended nuclear deterrence, is a myth. Yeah? The problem is that the foreign policy establishments of the Allies never have read Kissinger or Patrick Morgan or Tom Sauer and full-heartedly believe in this myth. And the US nuclear weapons establishment is happy that we believe in this myth because it helps them domestically to legitimize new nuclear weapon systems. So there's a huge education and awareness project needed to better inform the Allies, especially in the East, Eastern Europeans, East Asians, about the usefulness of extended nuclear deterrence. Now, if that education project fails, and if the Allies do not take up their responsibility with respect to nuclear disarmament, their obligation under the NPT, then it's easy to predict that more states will go nuclear, because that's the natural trend. And that we will end up with more conflicts and wars where nuclear weapons are explicitly threatened to be used and may de facto be used. Now, if the NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty, has not imploded before, it will certainly mean the end of the NPT at that time. Many observers, including advocates of the NPT, like Heather Williams, agree that the NPT already now is sliding into irrelevance. More NPT review conferences have failed than succeeded to come up with a consensus document, including the last two NPT review conferences. And the last one was supposed to be a party 50 years after the entry into force. It was not. It was not a party. It was a gigantic failure. Even if Russia would not have vetoed the final document in August 2022, the content of the document was lowest common denominator, far from enough to breathe new life into the regime. Strangely enough, most nuclear weapons experts do not share this analysis. They believe in the myth of the NPT. Now, if the NPT implodes, a nightmare scenario for most experts, certainly those of the nuclear weapon states, but a scenario that becomes more and more likely, then we end up with nuclear anarchy. That does not sound very good. However, you can also see it more positively. In that case, we end up with a world without a discriminatory treaty that divides the world in haves and have-nots. We will end up in a world in which each state that has not signed the TPNW and that wants to copy-paste the nuclear-armed states can legally do so. And let's see, maybe this evolution or revolution is exactly what we need as a wake-up call. I'm sure that the end of the NPT will focus the minds in Washington, D.C., Moscow, Beijing, Paris, and London, who now ridicule the position of states like Brazil, Indonesia, Iran, Egypt, Argentina, Mexico, Turkey, Nigeria, South Africa, the Philippines, and many others. Maybe some of the nuclear weapon experts in some of the think tanks in these capitals that I've just mentioned will think twice and come up with new ideas to rescue global nuclear governance. In short, in my view, the world will first have to see more proliferation, maybe much more proliferation, in order then to build down to zero. Now, I understand that many of you won't like this message. I end with a third scenario. And that's possible. The third scenario is possible that may prevent the previous night scenario. The current 9 nuclear-armed states take the decision together around the table and set concrete deadlines for nuclear disarmament and elimination, with 2045 as the ultimate deadline, 100 years after Hiroshima. They could take this initiative right after the UN summit of the future in September 2024, exactly 1 year from now. Regardless, and this is very important, regardless what the geopolitical situation is at that moment. Now, the new Agenda for Peace, the UN document that has been published this July in preparation for that summit, lists 12 actions. And the first one is to eliminate nuclear weapons. So only under this third scenario, the NPT will remain alive, and the TPNW will have played its role that was supposed to play.